KISS. Keep it simple, stupid.
I promise you, this is not a political podcast.
Jump, feel it deep into the pool, set up the mood. Paranoid radio, set up the mood. Paranoid radio, set up the mood. Paranoid radio, set up the mood. 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 Set up the mood.
All right, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. Testicles 1, 2. Testicles. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Paranoid Radio Podcast. I want to thank the Lord for allowing me to be here today, and I want to thank every single one of you for allowing me to enter your space. I am Trebos Garcia, your humble host. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you that the most important thing that you could do for the show today is word of mouth, and do not forget to check us out at paranoidradio.com. Also, check out Flavors of the Forest. Catch 15% off on your next checkout. Flavors of the Forest. What it is, you may be asking. It's Bigfoot actually growing garlic dust in back of his backyard, if that makes any sense. And then he puts it in a bottle for you, and then he sells it to you. And it's organic. It's really good for your health. Make sure you check out Flavors of the Forest. And again, use Paranoid at checkout. Again, do not forget that dropping a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify allows other people to enjoy the show as much as I enjoy making it. Now, it's the beginning of the year, guys, and I am booking and I'm conversating with a great amount of people and also amazing souls. So I had to touch base with this amazing, beautiful person. Her name, she goes under Gina Black, and she is the owner and the page navigator and creator of She Hunts on Instagram. She's been here before. Please give a warm welcome. I don't know why I'm studying today again. You do this to me.
Thank you so much for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Jumping in from the deep end of the pool and setting the mood. You did an episode with Ghost Joe, a personal friend of mine from New York. His episode's a lot more different than ours. It's not really surrounding around conspiracy theories or political conversations, but you rocked the mic. Congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you for recommending me. We had a really great chat. It was awesome.
Little Bird also told me that you're writing a book. What?
Yes. I am super excited. I'm working with Beyond the Fray Publishing, and I am putting together a book about hidden meanings in cemeteries. And it is, right now I'm about halfway through. And we're looking like April is the wrap-up date. So after April, it should be available. And I hope to send you a copy as soon as I have one.
As soon as that thing drops, you let me know. Send me some art, send me some stuff, and we'll start promoting it on the page, put it on the description of the show, especially for the spooky season that comes up right after April, right? A couple months after the summer. That's very important. Also, something I wanted to highlight. Your content's amazing, by the way. In the first episode when we spoke, you talked to me about how you like to take walks, drinking coffee in cemeteries. I've done that twice in my life. Now, we don't got great cemeteries here, but the ones that we do go, when I was younger, I used to smoke joints and just go to the top and just view the entire cemetery. And it's amazing stuff because you see sculptures, you see a lot of different things that back then I didn't understand. But now we have better learning of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you also mentioned that you did some studies. Now, I don't want to be rude or anything, but where can people find you?
So I am at She Hunts on Instagram and TikTok. And for right now, I'm hoping in the new year, I'm trying to get some, background information and things I need for hopefully either to launch a YouTube channel or a podcast. They're both on my horizon. So those are both goals that I'd like to accomplish in 2025. So hopefully I'll have some new platforms. But right now, just mainly Instagram and TikTok.
I'm very happy to hear that because I was about to tell you that with the momentum you're getting from not only your page, but the people from Parahouse that they also featured you. Shout outs to them. They also featured you on your magazine, on their magazine. It seems like you're cooking with gas and you've got to channel that energy. That's amazing stuff. And, take advantage of every moment. You also mentioned that you were doing that. This is not the first time you started blogging. You started selling stones and stuff too, right? With like quartz.
Yeah, I had for many years, I had a shop called Black Crystal Coven, and it's still up, but I don't use it anymore. And I ran that business from 2013 to, let's say, 2021. And I learned a lot. I learned how to, start a successful Instagram. I learned how to start a business, and I made a lot of friends and kind of, learned how to understand, how to navigate social media from that page. So I kind of have a soft spot for it. So I don't really want to delete it, but it's not really active anymore. But I learned a lot about how crystals can, affect our energy and enhance our energy. And it's an interesting concept, and it's one that I still, I who's to say if it's 100% true, but for me, I do feel better when I have certain crystals on my wrist or around my neck, and that's enough for me to enjoy them. So I, as a paranormal investigator, I do bring some crystals in my pockets, when I'm investigating, and I like to think
Yeah.
that it helps.
It helps direct those energies and keep the positivity, they keep the auras cleared, and then
Yes.
also negate anything negative that might be
Yes.
lingering, right?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, the black tourmaline is something you should always have with you, because whether you're repelling a spirit energy or someone else's negative energy that's around you, that's a crystal that they say is really good for that. So I always have it on me at all times.
I love to hear that. I love to hear that. Talking about educating us in the, I want to say, in the spiritual realm and ghostly realm in a spooky season. You took notice of some iron gates. The art in cemeteries is absolutely unique. But you sent me a list of stuff that you wanted to go through. Tell me a little bit about the iron gates that I failed to research on.
So if you ever go to a cemetery, oftentimes you're going to see around the perimeter of the cemetery a iron gate, and like a fencing that will go around the property. And sometimes you'll even see within the cemetery itself, plots will be like a family plot, for example, might have an iron gate around it. And a lot of people felt during Victorian times that the iron was not just a fancy way to show the perimeter of a cemetery, but it also had the purpose of keeping spirits in the cemetery, because it was a superstition, if you will, that ghosts could not pass through iron. And so many people thought, hey, if you're going to visit a loved one, they were worried that they would be followed home by another spirit or perhaps their loved one, and they would close the gate behind them. And it was very, very important that you close the gate. So a lot of cemeteries will have these gates to this day, and you might even find them around a plot. And it's very important to, whenever you visit, to always try to keep that gate closed out of respect.
I love that. I'm paranoid, bro. I think everything has to be with conspiracy theories, but there's always a root to things. The way everything's sculpted out, the architecture, there's acoustic properties to these things, which leads me to my next question. It's going to be an off-ball question. Do you think that maybe iron has some type of magnetic property that may be able to keep these, the spirits inside the cemetery
I
under
think it's
control?
I think it's entirely possible. And I think if you look through civilizations all around the world, iron is used in a lot of ceremonies and a lot of rituals. And, I know in certain, places in the United States where people practice witchcraft, they put iron nails over doors to keep negative energy away. It's one of those
What?
materials that it's old wives' tales that people have been practicing for centuries to repel spiritual energy or keep it contained in some way. So it's just an interesting thing that this phenomena of believing this goes across the entire world. But I mean, a lot of iron gates go back for hundreds of years around cemeteries all across Europe. And a lot of people they felt very strongly that it did contain energy. So I think it's possible.
That's very interesting. Why do you think they're placing that we always use stone as a tombstone?
So early cemeteries were using things like wood, and of course, over time, that didn't really hold up well. But stone really kind of came into place as far as generating a headstone out of it around medieval times, and also the Renaissance, you see more and more elaborate stone headstones. But it really is important to note that I think it was more of at first maybe convenience, grabbing wood or something else to mark a grave. It was convenient, it was easy, it was cheap. But over time, people started understanding, hey, this is not a long-lasting situation. But when it comes to stones on top of headstones, that has an interesting hidden meaning. So if you go to a cemetery and you see pebbles or little stones on top of the headstone, depending on the person buried, it might have a hidden meaning. So stones are more permanent than leaving flowers. Flowers will, eventually they're going to wither and they're going to, they're not going to last more than a couple days, but a stone will last much longer. And that represents the person's grief leaving that stone, that it's more permanent and it's something that is going to last forever, losing that loved one. Also in Jewish graves, people leave pebbles because in Hebrew, the word for pebble means bond. So if you're a family member or a loved one and you want to represent your bond for that deceased family member, leaving a pebble is common. So
That's interesting.
pretty interesting, yeah.
Historic value. Do you remember last time you were here and I asked you this? For a lot of people, it'd be like, "Oh, that sounds dumb, bro," but it's not really if you think about it. I tried to dive deep into it, but there's a lot of things covering up. I asked you, do you think that maybe some of the art on these tombstones, on these headstones, you called them, right? Do you think they depict maybe the lifestyle, or in other words, occult lifestyle that one person lived? And
Absolutely.
you mentioned it's very possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's hidden meanings among a lot of different icons that you find on headstones, tombstones, or gravestones, or whatever you want to refer to them as. Basically, the Victorian time was the golden era for hidden art. And just like if you go to a museum and you're viewing a painting by Paul Cézanne or Picasso or Salvatore Dali, they had hidden meanings in their artwork, and so did cemetery sculptures. Now, if you're looking at, certain common ones, there might be a dove, and the dove in many cases represents Jesus Christ. A lot of these, the icons that you find in cemeteries, a lot of them actually have Christianity roots to them. But, I wouldn't say a cult is a common one, but there are a lot of secret societies and fraternal orders that some people whisper about having occult tendencies. So I know it's been said the Freemasons have a lot of secret rituals. The Fraternal Order of the Odd Fellows, a lot of rituals, a lot of stuff like that. But they had their own icons that represented their fraternities that you'll find on gravestones. If you see chains with a link broken or three chain links together, that's usually the Odd Fellows. And if you see the sign for the Freemasons is kind of like a triangular icon with a G, you'll see that at a lot of Freemasons' graves, just showing that they were a member of that society. But I haven't really come across too many that had overtly occult reasons behind them. But there's certainly a possibility to a lot of art because a lot of people maybe couldn't display what they wanted to display. So they chose hidden pathways. I think one interesting one that I mentioned with you was the position of someone's headstone. So if someone's headstone, the average headstone faces east, which in both, I think a lot of Christian cultures, the sun rises in the east and the sun represents Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So a lot of gravestones will face the east direction so that they'll be hit with the light of God every morning. Now, if you see a gravestone in older cemeteries that's facing the opposite direction, facing the west, this could have been someone who had a falling out with the church, wanted to oppose the church, or someone who identified as a witch, or someone that the village might have deemed a witch. And they were ostracized in the cemetery and they weren't able to face the east because they were considered unholy. So
Talking about unholy. That was a bomb. I like that. I'm gonna follow that. I'm gonna amplify that part. I was doing some light research on the Puritans, how they traveled, and they got here, and they brought with them. They were trying to avoid a lot of the Catholic customs, and they started putting skulls with wings in their gravestones, right? And eventually, the skulls started evolving to cherubs with wings,
yes.
and they started putting meat on their face instead of a elongated skull and stuff. But it was because they didn't want to glorify unholy symbols like the Catholics were. Now, not bashing on anybody, we're just, we're talking about some
Yeah.
historical stuff that it's documented. So it's funny because now you see, have you ever been to the Trinity Church in New York?
No, I have not.
It's one of the oldest churches in New York City, and it has one of the oldest grave sites in the US. And it's huge because there's a lot of mysterious art on all of those headstones. And just like you said, I'm sure that they had, like, I've seen some of the Freemasons. I was watching videos last night and I was like, what the heck? It's filled with it. And then you'll see a lot of famous politicians there, a lot of famous people that came over from overseas, practitioners, ministers, and other people that, that influence our way of life today. Now, talking about that, what is it about the Jews? Do they have an custom also of facing a certain direction?
Well, a lot of the Jewish graves, they will face the entrance of the cemetery because they believe that when it's time for the resurrection, that they'll be ready to walk out of the cemetery. So it really isn't an east or west kind of thing. It's just usually face me towards the exit, So you'll find that oftentimes in either a Jewish section of the cemetery or an entire Jewish cemetery will usually be facing that direction.
A lot of the different art also that I found was doctors. So doctors would also have specific art things, the different depictions on their stuff. The handshake one was, I guess, the marriage when if they were married. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I guess separated
That
by
can
death.
have a couple. Yeah, that can have
Right?
a couple meanings. If you see handshaking, that was for the Victorians. It could have represented marriage between a bond between a man and a woman. It could also represent God welcoming the deceased into heaven. And the thing is with the handshake is you see that in a lot of these Victorian cemeteries, or you'll see hands. You might see a hand, just one hand pointing upwards, and that is the direction towards heaven, and indicating that the person is a follower of God, looking forward to the afterlife in heaven. And then if you see a hand facing down towards the grave, that might indicate someone who passed away at a young age, and that the hand is actually God pointing down at the person to welcome them into heaven. But hands are very common. And if you think about it, in the United States and most of the Western world, we greet each other with a handshake. A handshake is a basic form of human connection. We greet people when we meet them, and we shake their hand, look them in the eye, and we introduce ourselves. If we're greeting a friend or a colleague, we might shake their hand. If you're making a deal, if you're buying a house or a car, after the deal is done, you shake hands. It's just such an intimate, form of human connection. And it's not surprising that many people felt so strongly about that connection that they wanted it on their gravestones.
I love that. You went with the artistic form of it, and then you hit me with the facts. This is why I love talking to you because, yeah, even though our show revolves around conspiracy theories and the what ifs in the world, we also have to look at the critical things and look at the whole playing field from a 50,000-foot view and see what more data is there. We have to critically think and analyze all the information. What about coins? I followed up on your list, and coins on tombstones. What can you tell me about that?
So coins on tombstones, coins associated with funerals in general, coins and death are such it's an old practice, and it can actually trace its roots all the way back to Greek mythology. And the idea was that, basically you were paying your way into the afterlife. And when people pass, their eyes usually were covered with coins, or there were coins placed in the casket or coffin as a toll for the god of the underworld. And this particular tradition carried its way into, ancient Rome, into all across Europe. And you see that, people, when someone passed, they would hold their eyelids down with silver dollars or with coins. And then eventually it started making its way onto the top of the headstone itself. People would leave coins for their loved ones. Now, in the United States, there's an interesting hidden meaning that is just for us. And that kind of goes into the idea of veterans. So, and I know this might be maybe something that's one of your viewers might know if you have a veteran in your family, but not everyone does. It was definitely something that I didn't know about before I started researching this. But basically, if you see different coins on top of a headstone, they have a specific meaning, and it's not good to touch them. The penny is left on top of a headstone from a soldier to another soldier. Now, this could be a soldier that had a relationship or just a soldier that was visiting and paying respect. So they might not have necessarily known each other in life, but another soldier would leave a soldier a penny. Now, if you have a nickel and you leave a nickel on a grave, that means that soldier who left the nickel served in boot camp with the deceased. If you see someone that left a dime, that represents a soldier that fought alongside the deceased in whatever war, whether it was World War I, World War II, Vietnam, etc. If you see a quarter, that is the most important, and that represents that soldier standing at the grave was present when the person that is at rest there was when they passed away. So they were present at that time. But that's specifically for the United States.
The intricacy, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. I've never known that. I wouldn't have known. I mean, average Joes, right? You're like, okay, don't touch it. Out of
Leave it
respect.
alone. Yeah,
So leave it
exactly.
alone, guys. That's interesting. What about, okay, so what about, see, even that language, those are all codes that they teach you, and, what you do for special people in your life. What about the skulls? You said skulls, and this is interesting. I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce this word right, guys. Skulls and soul effigies?
Yes. So when you mentioned the Puritans and having the skulls, skulls can be found on a lot of headstones between the 16th and the 17th centuries, not just in the United States, but across Europe. And the idea was really at a time when there was a lot of mortality from disease. And the idea stems back to memento mori, which is, understand that you too one day shall pass. And, we only have so much time here on earth. And this was a reminder for people to, live their life to the fullest, but understand that death is inevitable. Now, what started happening, the skulls, when in the United States, you started seeing the winged skulls, the soul effigies, they can also be called that. And that would be a skull with wings around it, or a face, maybe a rough depiction of that person buried there, usually gaunt, like you mentioned, or grotesque in a way. But what started happening was the idea around the cemetery was changing. The Victorians were very romantic. They had this, beautiful love-hate relationship with death, but they celebrated it. So when the 1800s rolled around and the Victorian era was really, popping, the skulls and the soul effigies, the faces with the wings or the skulls and the wings started making their way more into a softer, sweeter, more, I would say less scary art form, which is what you mentioned, cherubs or angels with winged faces. And this was really more of a shift from the doom and gloom to more romanticism in general. And the shift from, all cemeteries really around the Victorian time became more beautiful. The towns, before we had public parks in the United States, people would actually convene in cemeteries. So what was happening was people had nowhere to go, nowhere to spend their Sunday afternoons, have their picnics. So many towns went through a beautification process where they brought in, landscaping, and they made sure that the grounds were kept well. And, the bodies were laid to rest 6 feet or, 6 feet under, not shallow graves where there might be bones sticking out. a lot of effort was put into cleaning up cemeteries around the United States during that time. So people were spending more time there because it was a park in a way before the National Park Act was signed and actual parks were made. People were going to these cemeteries. They would go to church. They would bring a picnic basket, and they would sit and they would have their lunch next to their loved one. And that was a normal practice, so they didn't want to look around and see doom and gloom. They wanted to look around and see beauty and see flowers and cherubs and, angels playing trumpets. They don't want to see the skulls and the skull and crossbones. So it was an interesting shift and chosen dynamic by cemetery planners.
I've seen even table headstones. They're like mini tables. And then even in the videos I was watching last night, trying to brush up, I've noticed that they were like, you come and they sit down. It was like, oh, this is where people would just have lunch on top of their graves. I was like, what? And remembering and reminiscing their loved one. In fact, in Mexico, and this is funny, in Mexico, the cartels have elaborate, very expensive tomb houses, if it makes sense, to honor their dead, right? Because the big money players and people that have contributed to their way of life. So these guys they make, and you could look this up, it's like a mini pool house, and then people go there and drink and party. And the coffin's like right there of this dead, deceased person. And I'm like, yo, like you guys are freaking crazy. But then again, a lot of these places, for example, and a lot of the people that, have this way of life, they even Mexican politicians are known to go to some of the deepest corners of Mexico to get blessed by these witches and people that practice dark arts. So I could also kind of guess and figure out that, people are using it for rituals and stuff, and they have the money to get everybody to shut down, and they control the entire population in certain areas. So I could only assume, right? But it's interesting that you said that. And
there's a lot of cemeteries around the world where people will go. You mentioned Mexico. They have the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, All Souls Day, All Saints Day. It's called different things, but people have parties in the cemetery, and they bring food and flowers and drinks, and they sit and they have a celebration in the cemeteries. There's people around the world that do that, and it's just something that changed in our society, but it's still pretty normal in many places around the world.
It's right. It did change in our society. They almost demonized it. They made it taboo almost.
Yeah.
Instead of just accepting, because we're all going there. It's accepting. It's growing the bond, going back full circle with death. It's a part of life, And hey, let me ask you something. During the times that you've taken your walks and gone through all the research, have you seen any art on coffins that really captured your eye?
Art on coffins? Not a whole lot, because I'm not really present at funerals. It's just more of, seeing the headstones on display. But I know that is something that a lot of people do, and the death industry is absolutely one that you can choose your adventure. You can have a very economic casket, or you can have a very, very elaborate casket with lots of art, and you can pick your colors, and you can go as far as you want with that. And there are so many options, and I know a lot of people do. But, it's something that I think is the decision that the family makes, and in some cases money is no object, and I haven't really seen too many coffins or caskets myself, thankfully, but I know that that's definitely a way to express grief, with a beautiful coffin. And there are a lot of companies they'll go above and beyond, just like they will on the headstone, and they'll carve whatever you want on that headstone. They will do whatever you want on the casket.
I seen this video last night where she was saying, imagine 200 years from now when they go and they see SpongeBob on your on your tombstone, on your headstone.
Yeah.
They're like, well, what is this demon that took this, or what is this depiction of this, creature that took this person's life? Tell me a little bit about the removable sections of monuments. What?
So, yeah, so basically in the United States around the Victorian era, there was a real need for art on headstones. As I mentioned, it was a time where people really wanted to memorialize their loved one with artwork and beautiful monuments. And
Mhm.
there was a particular type of material that was very popular. It came out of New England and it kind of spread across the country. And it was known as white bronze. And this material was made primarily, the primary material in it was zinc. Now, the white bronze headstones were more affordable than regular bronze, so they were easier for people to afford, and more people were able to get them. And what a lot of these companies that use that material did was they created little sections of your monument that could be interchangeable. So let's say, you're planning a family plot and you want to have a very large, tombstone in the center. Maybe you might want to put a rose on it. Maybe you might want to put a lamb on it. Maybe you want to have a cherub on it. But maybe later on down the line, somebody else in your family after you pass, you want to give them the option to put something else on it too. So they had these little sections that could be removed and replaced with a different art piece. So it left available room for the family to grow with their designs. So what was happening was, I think at some point, maybe some point during Prohibition era, the 1920s, when, rum running and, the bootleggers were, trying to make their way, there was some maybe rumors that cemeteries were used to house hidden booze. So the rumors say that in certain cemeteries, what these bootleggers did was they took screwdrivers and they took off these removable sections to the white bronze. They put booze inside them because they were just hollow. They were hollow monuments. And then they would close them up and they would tell their buddies, hey, go to Joe Schmo's grave. You'll see it in the middle of the cemetery. Unhook the screws, and then you can find all the booze. Now, I'm sure this happened to somebody. I'm sure somebody actually did this, or there wouldn't be the rumors in place. Because,
Word.
rumors, usually when there's smoke, there's fire. I'm sure it's happened, but I wouldn't say it's something that you can really substantiate with facts that were happening in every cemetery. I think, it might have been something that many people passed that story around, and some people believe it happened all over, but I think it might have just been isolated to some areas. But what was true is that you can remove those sections pretty easily. So, but it had a purpose when it was built, and I think it was a good idea,
Mhm.
considering the fact that cemeteries were constantly changing in aesthetic, that why not give the family the option? That seems like an enticing part of the deal. So,
If you give somebody, a crowd of people, a piece of information and then you ask them to start telling everybody, the
yeah.
story's gonna change. So
Yeah.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. I know that some of the things that I believe in are outlandish and are wild, but they all started somewhere. So there has to be some truth to that, even though there's not, like fact, like you said.
Mhm.
Now, Gina, you're such a great speaker. And these conversations are not only to enlighten people, but they're also to motivate you guys to, do some more research and check out the cemetery. My mom passed almost 2 years ago. I've
Sorry.
been to the cemetery twice.
Mhm.
Thank you. And the place it's called Rose Hills here in California, in LA. And it's a beautiful place. Beautiful. Not cheap, but it was beautiful.
Mhm.
And that's when and that's the same place that I used to go and smoke weed
Mhm.
with my ex and as a child. And you should see the Chinese graves in that
Mhm.
area. Oh gosh. You walk in, so it's a bunch of hills, right? And
Mhm.
you drive up, and it goes up and down, and then it starts climbing, 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 climbing. There's this giant chapel right at the corner, and then you keep climbing, climbing. This like a little Segway road that takes you higher to the hill. Mind you, now these hills have a college on them, and some of the hills are recycled. They were man-made, most of them. And the pinnacle at the top, at the very peak of this mountain, sits a giant little monument building, 3 stories high. And you should see how the rich Chinese folks, or maybe Taiwanese, decorate all of their tombstones, but they're built on each other. So I guess they don't bury, they bury like one person and then they stack their dead. And and it's like you walk in there and it's a giant hall, like a museum, bro. That's what I want to call it, like a museum, and it's rich because it has a bunch of writing. And I'm just like, well, I'm just called to like, you know. And I would go to the top and just smoke at the top, and like, dude, we're smoking with a bunch of dead people here, bro. We're just laughing, but and then they do statues. They do their angels the same way that we do. So every culture has their own meaning, their own symbology, and it's very important that you guys look at that because we're all gonna die, and we should all have respect for that, and we should all at least know what we want our caskets to look like, and tombstones and stuff, and how to reminisce and how to keep the memories alive. I've seen also a group of people actually that go to these places and clean up the tombstones. Just they brush through them just to keep the place clean. They cut the grasses and just to keep the memory alive. Even though people are their own people bloodline forgot about them. Gina, please let them know where they can find you.
Yes, I am on Instagram and TikTok at SheHaunts.
That's right. She's also writing a book. It's coming out in April. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you check her out. I want to thank you for spending time here, donating your time and your knowledge. We're going to keep building on this. And hopefully when your book comes out, you need to let us know so we can start helping you promote. Again, mad shout outs to Ghost Joe. That episode was amazing. This episode was nothing like that. That was intense. I loved it personally. And also make sure you check her out. She Haunts. All the descriptions are going to be, all the links are going to be in the description of the show. And also, she's on Instagram. She's going to be on the drop-down menu of ParanoidRadio.com as well. Thank you so much, Gina, for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Paranoid Radio.